So, good afternoon. Thank you so much for coming to the HPhil seminar. Today I have the pleasure to, somehow introduce you to our dear colleague, Geneviève Lachance. Geneviève Lachance is a member of the HPhil group. She did her PhD in history of logic, more precisely on the notion of formal contradiction prior to Aristotle. But nowadays she's developing this research project within the Center of Philosophy of the University of Lisbon under the title Aristotle in Armenian, Between Preservation and Transformation. Geneviève, thank you so much, and I will immediately give you the floor.
Okay, thank you very much, Philippa. Okay, so my presentation today stems from an article on the Old Armenian translation of Aristotle's categories and the Interpretationes, namely on the two first treatises of the Organon. So this article concerns philology and translation studies much more than philosophy. Also, it presupposes from the reader's part a knowledge of ancient Greek, and in the best case scenario, of a knowledge of a special type of Armenian called Hellenizing Armenian. So because of the technical nature of my topic, and also because I did not want to bore you to the core for 45 minutes, I have decided not to read my article, but to adapt it in a way that would be much more interesting for both you and me. So I have created a PowerPoint presentation with pictures, tons of pictures of manuscripts, and this PowerPoint presentation won't require any knowledge of Greek, of Armenian, and even of philology. Okay. So my presentation today concerns the edition of ancient Greek texts and the use of old translations in order to establish the Greek text. So I will concentrate mainly on Aristotle's categories and the Interpretatione. So we will start really slowly by taking a look at the direct tradition of Aristotle's categories and the Interpretatione, namely at the papyri and the manuscripts that are used to establish the Greek text. Then we will move more directly into the subject and look at the indirect tradition of Aristotle's categories and the Interpretatione, which include ancient translations. So the study of indirect tradition is still relatively new, and also it has been overlooked for a long time. In fact, the indirect tradition is often considered as less valuable than the direct tradition, which is, in my opinion, a mistake. And finally, we will jump right into the core of the topic and talk about the Old Armenian translation of Aristotle's logical work. We will examine the problems associated with its study, and we will discuss the need for a new methodology. So it is my contention that we need not only a new comparison of the Armenian with the Greek text, but also we kind of need a new methodology. Okay. So let's say, just imagine, let's say we have to edit a text by a modern author or a contemporary author. Let's say we need to edit a text by Marx or Nietzsche. So what will we do? Then we will first go to the place where they keep the paper of that specific author, and we will look at these papers, and after that we will look at the genesis of that particular book we want to edit. Then, if there is already one not translation, but one edition of that book, we will look at it. We will look at the proofs to see if the author has corrected this text. And of course, if there are a second or a third edition, we will look at them and compare everything. So these are the normal steps when you want to edit a text. However, when you want to edit an ancient author like Aristotle, who lived in the 4th century BC, you cannot do that at all. So why we cannot do that? Now it's really easy. It's because Aristotle wrote in the 4th century BC. It's a long time ago. And we don't have his papers, we don't have his autographs. And also, we don't have the first edition of Aristotle's text. So we know that the first edition of Aristotle were made in the 1st century BC in Rome by Andronicus of Rhodes. We think it's really is the first edition, but this edition, which is super important, we don't have it anymore. So we cannot use Aristotle's paper nor the first edition in order to establish the text of Aristotle. So what do we do in such a situation? We have to rely on two things, the direct tradition and the indirect tradition. So let's start with the direct tradition. And you start with the definition. So in philology and textual criticism, direct tradition refers to the transmission of a text through manuscripts, papyri, or printed books that were produced intentionally to transmit that specific word. It constitutes the primary direct witness to the author's original text. So if with Aristotle, in the case of Aristotle, we have to rely on two things, mainly on the papyri and on the manuscripts. So let's start with the papyri. So there is something really strange with Aristotle, is that we don't have a lot of papyri of Aristotle. And just to give you an example, a comparison, with Plato, we have 82 papyri of Plato's dialogue, but with Aristotle, we only have 8 of them. And so that's not a lot. And in terms of the categories and the Interpretatione, we have no papyrus of the Interpretatione, but at least we have 2 papyri of the categories. So we have, the first one is Papyri of Cyrenius. It's from the early 3rd century. And this papyrus was taken into account in Richard Baudius' edition of 2002. And there is another one, the Papyrus Harris, which is in England, and it's from the 2nd or 3rd century. So just like, I think it would be interesting just to look at pictures of these papyri. So the first one is the one from Egypt, from Oxyrhynchus. And as you can see, it's really small. There is only a total of 22 lines on that papyrus, and it's really damaged too. But it's still a good papyrus, because if we look at the second one here, the one from that is preserved in England, there's only 12 lines on it. And I've put the text, the transcription of the text in the right corner, and as you can see, there's not even like complete sentences. It's only words and some letters. So yes, we can use them in order to edit parts of Aristotle's categories, but we cannot use them to edit all the text. It's not enough. So we need manuscripts. So as I said, the number of papyri of the categories is not sufficient enough to make an edition of this text. And with the Interpretatione, we cannot even think about it because we have nothing. So manuscripts are really important for us. They are really the basis for us when we want to edit a text. And as the term, the Latin term says really clearly, manuscripts are books that were written by scholars and monks for centuries and centuries. So luckily, we are much more, and we are luckier with manuscripts than with papyri, because we have tons of them. In fact, we have more than 160 manuscripts just of the Organon, and these manuscripts were copied between the 9th century and the 17th century. And we have a lot of them because the Organon was really popular during late antiquity and the Middle Ages, and it was the texts of the Organon were widely studied in ancient schools, including the Neoplatonic school. and also in medieval universities. So here you have a list of the most important manuscripts used to edit the text of the categories and the Interpretazione, and they are classified according to groups. And as you can see just by the name, the majority of them are kept in Italy. So I want to show you just two manuscripts that are important with Aristotle. So the first one is the Codex Vaticanus Urbinas Graecus 35. It's from the 10th century, and it contains all the Organon, meaning like the logical text plus the rhetoric and the poetics. We know by whom it was copied. It was copied by a subdeacon named Gregory. And we also know who probably ordered that manuscript. It's the famous Archbishop Aritas of Caesarea. And also what's really interesting in that manuscript, you can see the text of Aristotle is in the left part. It's really small. And in the margin, what you have is all the scholia that are attributed to Aritas and his circle. And these scholia are also really important because they preserve ancient interpretation of the text, and we can learn a lot about the categories just by reading them. The other manuscript I wanted to show you is the Codex Sinaiticus. This is the first page of the De Interpretatione. It's a manuscript from the 9th or 10th century. And I wanted to show you that picture because what is great about that manuscript is that it was discovered in 1975. It was discovered very late. It was discovered in the monastery of St. Catherine's of Mount Sinai behind a closed wall. So what happened is like they wanted to do some work in the monastery, so they tear down the wall and they found, just imagine, tons of manuscripts, mostly the Bible and the manuscripts of the fathers of the church, but also some philosophical manuscripts. Unfortunately, with that manuscript, we only have the first or second page, so it's not complete, but at least we have these pages. And I thought it was really important to show you that picture, just because with philology, what we have to remember, it's never over, meaning that we can discover every day new papyri, new manuscript. So that's the thing that I find really interesting about philology and the study. Okay. So as I said, manuscripts are really important for us to establish the Greek text, but there is one problem, and I'm sure you can all guess what it is. These manuscripts, and especially the oldest Greek manuscripts that we have, are from the 9th century AD, and Aristotle wrote in the 4th century BC, which means that there is a chronological distance of 13 centuries between the time when Aristotle wrote and the time when our oldest Greek manuscript was written. So as you can imagine, there are many errors, be them intentional or unintentional, in these manuscripts. Mainly because they were transcribed by hand from century to century to century. So because of that, we need, in a way, other sources in order to help us establish and edit a correct Greek text. And these other sources are part of what we call the indirect tradition. So again, with a definition, so in philology and textual criticism, indirect tradition refers to the preservation of a text through means other than direct copies of the original work. For instance, so we have quotations, paraphrases, commentaries, translations, imitations, scholia, anthology, and other derivative sources. So today I'm just going to talk about the translation, but I could have talked for hours about, especially about commentaries and scholia. They are really important. but I'm just going to talk about the ancient translations. So in the case of the categories and the Interpretazione, there are four ancient translations that are super important for us. So it's the Latin one, the Armenian, the Syriac, and the Arabic. So the Latin, the Armenian, and the Syriac were made around the same time between the 5th century and the 7th century, which means, and that's really important, that they are older than our oldest manuscripts, Greek manuscripts. They are older by 3 to 7 centuries, which is kind of important. As for the Arabic tradition, translation, they are older than the other ones. So the Arabic translations were made in the 9th century, so around the same time than our oldest Greek preserved manuscript was copied. So as you can see, it is important to study also the indirect tradition as it gives the editor data that are older than the one given by our oldest manuscripts. So I thought it would be interesting just to take a quick look at all these different translations, but very quickly. So the most famous one is, most famous one for us Westerners is the Latin translation by Boetius. So it is really an important translation because it's because of this translation that logic was studied during the Middle Ages in Europe. And also just to give you an idea of its importance, so Aristotle, De Interpretatione, it's not even its real title. The real title is the Peri Hermeneias, but we call it De Interpretatione because it's the title that Boetius gave this text in Latin. So now we use the Latin term, the Latin title given by Boetius. So just to tell you how Boetius was influential in the West. So Boetius made this translation between 500 and 510. It's a literal translation, meaning that you can see the Greek beneath it. It's also a translation that comes together with commentaries. And that is important because when we read the commentaries, we can understand the translation choices made by Boetius when he translated these texts. And of course, because this translation is really old, it was copied in manuscripts, so we need a critical edition to study it. And by chance, we have one. We have a critical edition of both texts by Minio Paluelo, made in 1961 and 1965. Now, the Armenian translation. So here it's an image of David the Invincible. And we thought for a long time that David the Invincible was the translator of the Armenian translation, but now we tend to think that it was not him. It was we don't know who translated the categories and the Interpretazione in Armenian. So now we believe it's an anonymous translator. This translation is really old too. In fact, it's probably older than the Latin one. We think it was made between the end of the 5th century and the beginning of the 6th, and we base ourselves on linguistic studies. It's a hyper-literal translation. Some people say that it's not even comprehensible and that it's Greek written with Armenian letters. It's also a translation that was transmitted together with commentaries, and they are not studied except by a few people, and I am one of these people. And also, we have one critical edition of the De Interpretazione, but we don't have any critical edition for the categories. We also have a Syriac translation, and here, the Syriac tradition is great. It's super rich. Just to tell you, like for the categories, we have 3 translations of Syriac translation of this text made before the 8th century, and for the De Interpretazione, we have 2 of them. We also have critical editions of these translations, but they are still lacking a critical edition of Jacob of Edessa translation of the categories, and still lacking also the a critical edition of the anonymous translation of the Interpretatione. And also the last thing I want to tell you about the Syriac translation is that what's great about the Syriac tradition is that they have tons of manuscripts, of course, but they are super old. For instance, the anonymous translation of the categories was made in the 6th century, but we have that translation preserved in a manuscript that is from the 7th century, meaning that there is only 1 century difference between the translation and the manuscript, and that you would never see that in the Greek, with Aristotle and with the Greek manuscripts. I don't know with the Latin one, but I don't know about it. Perhaps it's the same thing, but so that's something that is great about the Syriac tradition. Now, the Arabic translation of Aristotle's categories and the Interpretazione. So we have 1 of the categories and 2 of the De Interpretazione. Unfortunately, these Arabic translations are not really popular with Greek editors for 2 reasons. First is because they are late. They are from the 9th or 10th century, so at the same time than our oldest Greek manuscripts. So the Latin, Syriac, and Armenian are before the Arabic one. And the other thing that is interesting is that these Arabic translations were made not from Greek to Arabic, but from Syriac to Arabic. So in fact, they are translation of translation. So because of that, they are less studied by scholars who, especially by the editor of Greek text. Just to give you an example here, it's the edition of Wyman of Aristotle's De Interpretatione, and he uses the translation by David with the delta, the Latin one by Boetius, and 2 of the Syriac translation, but he doesn't use at all the Arabic translation, which is, in my opinion, not a shame, but it's an error. They should include that translation into the edition of the Greek text. Because yes, it was made from Syriac, but we can still learn a lot of things about the transmission of the Organon through this Arabic translation. Okay. So yes, so let's jump right into the core of the subject. Which is the Armenian translation of Aristotle's Organon. So, what is that sound?
Don't mind. We're switching the camera.
Oh, okay. So we're going to just look at the problems and link with the study of the Armenian translation. And also, we're going to look at the method, some method we can use to better study the Armenian translation. So one of the problems is that we really need a critical edition of the translation, the Armenian translation. So as I said, the Armenian translation was done around the 6th century. And our oldest manuscripts of them are from the 12th or 13th century. Thus, there is a chronological distance of 7th century. So it is thus important to have a critical edition of these translations in order to account for the textual variance between the manuscripts. So yeah, just for your information, this is a list of the most important manuscripts of the Armenian categories and the Interpretazione. 5 of them are kept in, of course, Armenia, And the last one is a really important manuscript, and it's from the 12th and 13th century, so manuscript Aldini, and it's kept in Pavia in Italy. Okay. So as I said also, I don't know if I said it. No, yes, I have said it. So there is no critical edition of the Armenian translation of Aristotle categories. So we need one. However, we have three editions. The first one was made in 1833 in Venice, but this edition is not great because it was not made according to good philological standards. The second one is the diplomatic edition of F.C. Conibert. I'm going to talk more about it soon. And the third one is a partial edition of the categories and the Interpretazione made in 1961, and it is just based on the manuscripts that are kept in Armenian. So we do not have a critical edition of the categories, but I think it will be really easy to do one because we can use the edition by Aref Satyan and the one by Conibert, and perhaps do another collation with the three manuscripts of the Mikitaris from Venice. And so it's something we should work on, but I don't know. But I would like to work on it one day. I must admit, but I don't know when. The second problem I wanted to tell you about is the fact that so we have a critical edition of Aristotle De Interpretatione in Armenian, but the thing is this Armenian critical edition cannot be used by a Greek editor unless, of course, he knows Armenian. I'm just going to use the Latin translation in order to make my point. So here we have the first page of the critical edition of Boitius' Latin translation of Aristotle De Interpretatione. So as you can see in the right corner, we can see the Becker pages. So it's really easy for us just to situate ourselves into the text. Also, and now that's more a cultural thing to say, but the thing is, when we look at this edition, it's written in Latin script, so it's our script. But also, when you are someone who edits Greek, ancient Greek text, usually you've studied classics, so you've learned Greek and Latin. So if someone wants to do a critical edition of a Greek text, that person usually knows Latin. So it will be really easy for that person to use that critical edition. And even if his or her Latin is not super great, it's easier for that person to use this critical edition because that person knows the Latin script, and it's really easy to understand in a way the text. Also, what I want to point out is in this critical edition, there are two apparatus. So the first one is one that is, you can see the Greek compared with the Latin. And in the second one, there is the second apparatus, it's all the Latin manuscripts that are compared together, and we can see the different readings. So brace yourself for the Armenian. So this is the first page of the Armenian, the critical edition of the Armenian De Interpretazione. It was made in 2016 by Aram Tovshan, and it is a really good edition. But as you can see, well, first, it's difficult to situate ourselves into the text because there's no Becker pages. But that's not the worst part, and the worst part. It's a really good edition, but the thing is, when you look at it, well, it's Armenian translation. It means that it's written in Armenian with the Armenian script, but that's kind of the problem if you are a Greek editor and you know Greek and Latin, but usually you don't know Armenian and you don't know the Armenian script. So it's really difficult for a Greek editor to use that edition unless the person decides to study Armenian, or the person works with another person who knows Armenian and is able to read it and knows also Greek. So that's one of the problems. And in a way, I don't know if we can say it's a cultural problem, but definitely the fact that Armenian is what they call it an Eastern language, but it's the same thing with Syriac and Arabic. It's languages that are written in a different script, thus it is much more difficult to have access to them. Yes, we have to study them in order to use them. Also, the other thing I wanted to point out, it's there is only one apparatus criticus, so it's the one, so it's a good one. It's at the bottom. This apparatus compares all the different reading in all the different Armenian manuscripts. So as you can see, and especially when we compare with the Latin translation, we don't have an apparatus that compares the Greek and the Armenian, which means that we need, again, someone that will work with the Greek editor and will compare the Greek and the Armenian. So that's one of the problems. Okay. The third problem is that the Armenian edition used by Greek editors is unfortunately outdated. So when you open a critical Greek edition of the categories and the Interpretatione, you will see notes in the bottom and you will see different reading from the Armenian translation. So this reading comes from that book, which is super important for me and for people who work on this subject. It was made by F.C. Conibert in 1892. And it's really based on this work that we compare, we know about the comparison of the Greek and the Armenian text. Unfortunately, it was done very long ago, in 1892. So at that time, the standards were not the same. But as you will see, I will criticize a little bit F.C. Conibert, but you have to remember that that guy is super important, and in fact, he's a hero of mine. So I don't want I don't want you to think that what he did was not great. It was fundamental. Okay, so Conibert's edition is structured in three parts. The first one is a comparison between the Armenian text and the Venetian edition of 1833. So this part, we cannot really use it anymore because the Venetian edition was not made according to modern standards. Just to tell you, in this edition, they use 3 manuscripts. And we don't know which reading the editors decided to choose. They don't write it. There's a minimal apparatus criticus. And also sometimes when the editors had problems with the Armenian, they decided to check the Greek text, and they took the Greek text and adapted the Armenian based on it. So that was not great. The second part is still used now. It's the comparison between the Armenian text and the Italian manuscript, the MS, the Codex Aldini. So comparison between that codex and the Greek text. So this is still important, but as I've told you, there are 5 other manuscripts that are important that are kept in Armenia. So yes, a comparison is great with the Codex Aldini, but we should do a better, a more thorough comparison, and we should include the manuscripts from the Matena Daran in Armenia. But the thing is, Conibert did not know about these manuscripts, so he could not have done it. And the third part is the diplomatic edition of manuscript, the Codex Aldini. So diplomatic edition, it's like you reproduce the text of that manuscript and then you compare it with other texts. So it's not a critical edition, and this third part can only be consulted by people who know Armenian. And so the problem is that even though sometimes we still look at this edition, it's still not a critical edition. And also it was not made with consistent standards too. Now, the fourth problem, and it's the last problem I want to highlight here, is that there is a need for a proper comparison between the Greek and the Armenian, and also for a proper method of presentation. So what I did, I used the critical edition of the Interpretatione. I compare it with the critical edition of the Greek text. And then I noted all the readings and variants, and then I compare what I found with what Conibert had found too. And I noticed that he did not took into account, and did not take into account every differences that were existing between the Armenian and the Greek. For instance, Conibert did not report every difference pertaining to articles and particles. And I know articles and particles are not that important. Like, they are not important really for the meaning of the text, but the thing is, they are really important when you want to study the transmission of the text. So it's important to note every difference, even with a tiny article or particle. Also, Conibert did not report all the differences between Armenian manuscripts. So sometimes when we read them, we have the impression, oh, there's no difference between the Armenian and the Greek. But then if you look at the critical edition, you will see, oh, no, there's a difference. It's just Conibert did not use other because he didn't do a critical edition, and he didn't use a lot of manuscripts too. Also, Conibert never really explained linguistic differences between Armenian and Greek that could help in understanding particular readings. So sometimes we have difference between the Armenian and the Greek, but we can explain them just by saying, oh, in Armenian, you cannot really distinguish between the dative and the genitive. So that's why you cannot really account, that's how you can explain the difference, and not by saying, oh, it's because the Greek text had that reading. So he never really talked about the linguistic differences. And these are important because a translation is, after all, a text written in another language. He also did not explain why it was sometimes difficult to know for sure what the Armenian translator was reading in the Greek text. So sometimes when you look at his edition, he puts a question mark. So we have the impression, oh, he doesn't know if there is a difference. So yes, it's a good thing that he put a question mark, but I think he should have explained why. So because it's just an example, but sometimes, like with the categories, I don't know, I think it's on the first page. There are two readings. So it's for the word all, so pass or a pass. And in Armenian, it's not the word that is used cannot translate. It can translate both pass and a pass. So that's why Conibert put a question mark. But he should have explained that in Armenian there is no way for us to know what was the Greek. Also, Conibert did not compare the translated text of Aristotle's categories and the Interpretazione with their respective commentaries, because he did not edit them. But I think when you study the translation, you should study also the commentaries, because these ancient Armenian translations were preserved, intertwined with the commentaries. So the commentary is really important. And finally, Conibert did not study the usus scribendi of the translator, so the translator choices. So again, it's important to know how the translator translated his text. The translator had habits, so it's important to know them. That way, we can understand more the translation and better judge what was the Greek that was there in the copy he had. Okay. So, as a conclusion, I think that there is really a need for a new method when studying ancient translation. And I even think we should create a new discipline in order to study them, these translations, because in a way, when you study an ancient translation, especially an ancient translation of really old text, you have to know know many other disciplines. You have to know about philology, about translation studies, about, of course, Greek and the other language in which the translation is. So I think that we should rethink how first we view ancient translation, and also think about a new way to present them. And I must admit that this way of presenting the ancient translation, we should always have in mind the public, and the public is the Greek editor. I think we should write like a document that will inform the Greek editor about the translation and help that editor better understand the translation in order to better understand the transmission and the Greek text that he is editing. So I think that such a study, of course, should stand on its own and should include. So what I can imagine is like a book with different sections. There would be a section about the differences between the source language and the target language. There will be also a section on the translation techniques used by the translator. I think a section on the history of the transmission of the source text and the translation would be also really informative. Of course, in that book, there should be a critical edition of the translation, where we should put, of course, the pagination, the Greek pagination. And I think that in this critical edition, there must, I would just put one apparatus, so the one that compares the Armenian manuscripts. Because the thing is, I really believe that we should note every difference between the Greek and the Armenian. And if we note them all, the second apparatus would be too heavy. So we should instead just have one apparatus, and in a separate section, we should have a text where we note all the differences, and by all, I say really all, the particles, articles, everything. So that way, the Greek editor wouldn't see the differences between the Greek and the Armenian, and will know when an article is missing. And in that section, we should also take into account, of course, the variance in the translation text, but also the variance in the original text, meaning in the Greek. And we should also, when we can, explain the variance in the translated text. And I think that also such a study should also include a section about the links between the translation text and the various Greek manuscripts that were preserved, because I think it's, so the Greek text of the Organon is contaminated. It's really difficult to find families and what was the archetype, because it's too contaminated. And I think it's perhaps the same thing with the translation, but it would be great if we could find what was the original Greek copy that the translator used. So I think because of that, it would be great to have such a section in the new study that I'm proposing. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Geneviève. Now we have time for questions and answers. Do you have any questions?
Thank you very much. I had no idea all the troubles about translation, so for me it was really interesting. But I was just